With a sixth game now let loose on the games industry, cunningly named Far Cry 5, Ubisoft Montreal's open-world shooter has become a legit Hall of Fame franchise. It's taken us from tropical beaches to mountaintops, from primeval tundra to, tropical beaches again. It's taught us that man's deadliest weapon is a pair of binoculars, and it's produced more charismatic bad guys who are undone by their love for a monologue than an I hate James Bond convention. But where did all its traditions and trappings come from? Which were the best moments in the series, and why did its developers ever think it might be fun to suffer from malaria for an entire game? Join us as we journey back to the start and plot the evolution of Far Cry games.
Fight back against these maniacs.
2004 was very much the year of the corridor, so to gaze out and see a lush tropical island sprawling off into the horizon was really something. Handsome beast for the time too. But how recognisable is it compared with modern day Far Cry's? Well, it's worth bearing in mind that this is the only one not to be developed by Ubisoft Montreal. Crytek created it, and as you'd expect, there are as many Crysis-like touches to it as there are future Far Cry's. Still though, taking down enemy outposts, marking baddies with your binoculars, and caged animals meant lots of foundations were laid in this series' debut. Incidentally, the first Far Cry is infamous for these accidentally hilarious enemies, which are supposed to be mutated humans but look like sentient monster munch. Let's all be glad they dropped the mutants after this one, eh?
What the hell is that thing?
What a fascinating game Far Cry 2 is. On one hand, it laid down the most essential tenets of the franchise to come, building a vast open world and leaving you in charge of conquering it one safe house at a time. But at the same time, it seemed determined not to let you enjoy any of it. Between the ever-respawning enemies, the unrelenting brownness, and your frequent fits of, oh, I need to sit down for a bit because of my malaria, it can very easily feel like a bit of a chore. Major evolutionary steps forward were made all over the place though. Tonally, it's a world away from the first game. Where Crytek were happy with the Gennaro action movie script that even Steven Seagal would probably have demanded rewrites on, Ubi Montreal's first effort at Far Cry is dark, brooding, and voiced as if all the actors have a taxi with the meter running waiting outside. Nevertheless, it set number 3 up for greatness with its scale, and even began oddly specific traditions like healing yourself in grim first-person fashion. Was that needle even sterilised? Did he even look at it before plunging it into his arm? At least that gross thumb relocation animation wasn't to be implemented until the next game. Yuck. Now this is where it all came together. Bringing back the sun-kissed climes from the original, Far Cry 3 added some spice to its tropical punch with a story about insipid gap year kids getting in trouble with pirates. And boy, do they wish we were talking about those naughty software pirates who managed to download Game of Thrones episodes before they're even filmed. These boys mean business. For the first time, there was story here that you could really sink your teeth into, thanks in no small part to those trippy sequences and antagonist Vass, the Charlie Day of human traffickers.
Did you want me to slice you open like I did your friend?
Everything okay, mate? You seem stressed. Better than all of that was the way its systems came together and just begged you to take over the island in a way that made more immediate sense than in the malaria-addled heat haze of Far Cry 2. Everything you do moves you closer to becoming the all-conquering uber gap year kid who can take Vass down. Hunting wildlife opens a crafting system that leads to better gear, climbing radio towers unlocks more of the map, killing people makes you better at killing people. It's a perfect gameplay loop of exploration and reward, played out under a cloudless sky, and for that reason it's still considered by many to be the pinnacle of Far Cry's, the farthest cry, if you will. Do you remember the 80s? Do you hold them dear with the kind of rabid fetishism that alienates friends and family members? Far Cry 3's 2013 expandalone, Blood Dragon, certainly hopes so. Intended to parody the ultra-macho action movies and kids' cartoons of the decade, Blood Dragon starred Aliens and Terminator actor Michael Biehn as a cyborg commando sent to an island that looks suspiciously like the one in Far Cry 3 to, shoot people. Shoot them with his cyborg commando guns, and do some swearing while he's at it. Riding the synthwave movement that propelled Nicholas Winding Refn's Drive and Kavinsky's pulsing retro tunes into mainstream popularity, this was Ubisoft Montreal letting its hair down after creating a far more serious proposition in the base game. Not that it was entirely unrecognisable from that base game, you understand. Do you remember many tiger attacks in 80s movies? Maybe it's her faulty memory chips.
I know you will.
When our ancient elders first coined the phrase "the apple doesn't fall far from the tree," we know now that they were actually making a waspy and frighteningly prophetic remark about how similar Far Cry 4 is to 3. We know mountains are different to beaches and that highly strung vast chap is nowhere to be seen here, still there's something familiar about all this. There's the breathtaking exotic location. Oh, and here's the erudite baddie whose pomposity will eventually prove his downfall. Right on time, Pagan Min. Looking sharp if we may say so. Oh, we may not. Absolutely fine. Not a problem. Trippy sequences with luminous colours everywhere? Check.
Of course!
Aggro wildlife and hang gliders are present and accounted for too. And what would Far Cry be without those brutal melee takedowns, eh? This is what chiropractors' nightmares look like. In truth, the Himalayas are a great venue to run amok in, and fighting yetis on mountaintops while birds of prey crashed the party did have its appeal. But Far Cry 4 seemed content to retread the same ground as its predecessor, which frustrated some who'd already sunk the hours into that and were getting a bit too familiar with the formula. Sometimes we still have to stop and check that this wasn't all a big April Fool's joke, but no, there it is, the series really did go back to the Stone Age in 2016. Hello Far Cry Primal. It's fitting, isn't it, since we're talking about the evolution of a series, that we should visit humankind's own breakthrough era. One of great big bushy beards, saber-toothed tigers, and clubbing chaps to death because they grunted at you funny. And you have to hand it to Far Cry Primal. Despite its adherence to certain specific tropes like the trippy sequences, it can't be accused of resting on its laurels like number 4. Animal baiting and taming were introduced here, and although they didn't carry through de facto into Far Cry 5, it was a decent laugh befriending wolves. And so it came to pass that Far Cry ended up in the Montana wilderness in 2018, bringing recognisable elements from 5 previous outings and wrapping them around a story about a death cult run by Matthew McConaughey's doppelganger with a man bun. Far Cry 5's eye for pretty views and natural beauty comes right from the first game, likewise the binocular scouting and outpost battles. From number 2, it inherits the central concept of conquering a map, and from 3, it gains all the pretty ways of depicting the systems behind that conquering. 4 and Primal happened too, and influenced its name and numeral, if nothing else. Far Cry 5 pushes the franchise forwards too. Human or AI teammates provide a spot of company when you fancy it, and rather than have you clamber up towers in time-honoured fashion, except this one single time for good luck.
Know what you're thinking, and no. I ain't gonna have you climbing towers all over the county for me.
Number 5 steps away from the old formula. It wants you to find the enemy camps, hunting spots and other areas of inevitably macabre interest by getting out there and exploring the environment, not the minimap. In that way, it's gone back to where it all began, the azure coasts of the 2004 debut. If you enjoyed watching the Far Cry franchise evolve from knuckle-dragging mutant to sophisticated cultist homo sapien, show some love with a thumbs up, and let us know which other franchise evolutions you want to see. Oh, and if you hit the subscribe button, we'll call off this ravenous pack of honey badgers.